I had been running the Iranith corridor for 11 years before I stopped paying attention to the stations. That sounds worse than it is. What I mean is that I had stopped seeing them as places and started seeing them as coordinates. Fuel depots with airlocks, waypoints in a scheduling system, rows of numbers on a manifest. Iranith 6 was a resupply mark on a chart. 2 days, maybe 3, topped-off tanks, and a cleared hull register. And then back out into the dark where the mapping sensors could breathe. That was the job. That was what the Union paid me to do, and I was good at it. And goodness at a job has a way of making everything outside it feel slightly unreal. My name is Davin Oral. Was at the time the commanding officer of the survey vessel Meridian Claws, a 6-person crew running long-haul dark matter corridor mapping in the outer drift. No combat posting, no glory run. We found corridors, charted them. We filed the reports, and the Union built trade lanes where we said they could. Useful work, invisible work, the kind of work that means something only in retrospect. I was 43 years old. I had been in the Union Survey Branch for 19 years, retired for 2, recalled for 3 more when the Iranith corridor opened up and they needed experienced eyes. Marriage had ended quietly 8 years prior, no particular wound to it, just 2 people who had chosen different distances. I mention this in this odd is relevant to understanding why when I wandered into the central forum of Iranith 6 on the second morning of our supply, I was not distracted by anything or anyone waiting for me. I had nowhere pressing to be. I had no one expecting a message. I was, as I had been for some time, simply present in the world, watching it go past, not particularly moved by any of it. That was my condition when I saw her. I should explain Iranith 6 first, because the station matters to understanding what happened inside it. The Velshari built Iranith 6 approximately 400 years ago, in the era before their deep drift cartography merged with Union's survey data, when they were still the only navigators in this part of the corridor. The station is shaped like a sealed lantern, a central core of living and administrative decks, ringed by cargo and mechanical bays on the outer shell, and all of it built from a dark mineral alloy that absorbs light and gives nothing back. You step off an airlock, and the first thing you feel is the contrast. Human stations throw light at you. Iranith 6 keeps its light to itself. The Velshari are bioluminescent. Their light is intrinsic. Not a reflection, not a projection, but something generated from within the body, a slow radiant pulse that varies in intensity across individuals and castes. On a station built to absorb ambient light, every Velshari you encounter is their own light source. Walking through Iranith 6 at a busy hour is like walking through a corridor of lanterns. Happen to have opinions. Their culture has built an enormous architecture around this luminescence. I learned most of what I know about it afterward, in the weeks and months that followed what happened that morning, reading everything I could find in the Union's cultural archives. At the time I knew almost nothing. I knew they glowed. I knew the glow varied. I did not know what that variation meant to them. What it meant in broad terms was this. A Velshari individual's radiance level determined their social and familial, standing in ways that were ancient and deeply ingrained. High-glow individuals, what they called full light, held elevated status, access to the station's better decks, priority in trade negotiations, and, most critically for what I witnessed that morning, preferential standing in the bonding hierarchy. The Velshari formal bonding system, their equivalent of a marriage contract, was built around the concept of luminous compatibility. A high-glow individual was expected to bond with someone whose radiance matched or enhanced their own. The goal, as best I could later understand it, was the continuation of luminous lineage. The belief that a bond between radiant individuals would produce children of greater light. The corollary to this belief was brutal in the way that all cultural corollaries to hierarchies are brutal. Individuals who generated low luminescence, what the Velshari called cold light, were considered unsuitable bonding candidates for anyone of standing. It was not, from what the archives told me, an actively persecuted status. It was a quieter cruelty than that. It was simply an assumption. Cold light individuals were not bonded. They were not presented for bonding ceremonies. They existed in the station's life without that particular architecture built around them, and the culture did not see this as a loss. because the culture had long since decided their light was not worth building around. I did not know any of this when I wandered into the Central Forum at the second hour of the station's morning cycle. The Central Forum of Iranath 6 is the largest interior space on the station, a high-ceilinged acagal chamber that serves as market, meeting space, on certain mornings, the venue for formal station ceremonies. There are tiered observation galleries on 3 sides. The floor is polished to a mirror shine, and in the mirror, the bioluminescence of every Velshari in the room doubles, so the whole space seems to float in soft, layered light. I had gone looking for the station's trade registry office, which my navigator had told me was somewhere off the forum's eastern arcade. I was holding a data chip with our manifest, and I was not paying attention to the ceremony that was apparently underway in the center of the chamber because, as I have said, I had grown accustomed to stations as logistics problems, not as places where things happen to people. I found a spot near a pillar along the gallery's lower tier and stood there for a moment, orienting myself. The eastern arcade should have been directly across the forum floor. Between me and it was the ceremony. There were perhaps 80 Velshiri in the chamber. The observation galleries were partially filled. The floor space was arranged in a formal ring. I could see that much, with a small raised platform at the center. On the platform stood 2 groups of people facing each other, and between them slightly apart from both, a single individual. She was small. That was the first thing I registered, before I understood anything else about the scene. Small even by Velshari standards, tend toward lean and angular. She held herself with a stillness that I would have taken, in a human being, the stillness of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. Her hands were folded in front of her at the precise angle of someone maintaining a formality they have rehearsed. Head was inclined slightly forward, not in deference exactly, but in the way of someone who has decided to receive whatever is coming without flinching. Her bioluminescence was, I would learn the word for it later, cold light. What I saw at the time was that she glowed less than the people around her. Not that she didn't glow at all. She did. A soft blue-white pulse, steady and quiet, visible at her neck and along the backs of her hands and faintly tracing the line of her jaw. The individuals on either side of her pulsed considerably brighter. The family group to her left, 6 individuals, formally dressed in layered dark fabric that made their own luminescence vivid by contrast, glowed with the warm amber gold that I would come to understand was the top of Velshari radiance hierarchy. The official at the platform's edge glowed a steady silver white. Even the witnesses in the nearest gallery tier put out a warmer light than she did. The ceremony was already in progress when I arrived. I did not hear the beginning of it. What I heard as I stood against the pillar trying to locate the eastern arcade was the formal closing of something. A declaration, in Velshari, delivered by the elder of the Amber Gold family group, in a tone that was not cruel. That was the thing I would remember. Not contemptuous, not theatrical, simply a fact. The tone of someone filing a correction to a document. Efficient. Final. The station's translation system, a public function in the forum, rendered it in standard at a murmur I caught only in pieces. Insufficient radiance. The bonding record to be struck. The family's formal withdrawal. The small woman on the platform did not move. She did not look up. She held her hands folded and her head slightly down, and she received it the way you receive something that you already knew was coming, that you prepared yourself for, and that still lands exactly as hard as you feared. The official made a notation. The Amber Gold family group began to withdraw. The witnesses in the gallery began to shift and murmur, the way crowds do when a formal proceeding has concluded and they are returning to their private thoughts. I stood against the pillar and watched the small woman on the platform, still folded, still inclined, and I felt something that I did not have a precise name for at the time. It was not pity exactly. Pity has a distance to it. Feel it from a remove. What I felt was closer to recognition. The recognition of watching someone receive something that is unfair and not cry about it, because crying would give the people who made it unfair a thing they do not deserve. I had been in the Union Survey branch for 19 years. I watched men and women be passed over for commands they were better equipped for than people who received them. For reasons that had nothing to do with their competence. I had watched capable people learn to fold their hands and hold their heads at the precise angle of someone absorbing an injustice with dignity. I recognized the posture. I did not make a decision. I want to be clear about that, because people have since described what happened next as though I had a plan, a calculation, a cultural intervention. I did not. I made the choice that anyone makes when they see someone standing alone after something unfair has just been done to them. And the choice was simply walked over. The ceremony had concluded. The platform was clearing. The Amber Gold family was moving toward the gallery's western exit. The official was making his notations. The crowd was dispersing back to their business. The small woman had stepped down the platform and was standing just off it, on the polished floor, and she was looking at nothing in particular, looking at a middle distance that contained no specific object. The look of someone organizing themselves internally before they have to go back to being visible. I walked across the forum floor and stopped 2 arm lengths from her, because 2 arm lengths is the distance at which approaching a stranger reads as intentional without being threatening. I had learned this on a dozen stations across a dozen species protocols. People the distance that lets them choose whether to close it. She looked up. Her eyes were very dark, a deep gray violet, large, with the particular quality of Veljari eyes that makes them seem lit from within, even when the individual around them is not glowing brightly. Up close, her luminescence was more visible than it had been from across the chamber. The blue-white pulse at her neck was steady and unhurried, something breathing slowly. I found it, for a reason I could not have articulated, reassuring. She did not speak. She was waiting for me to demonstrate whether I was worth the words. I said, "And I am aware this was not elegant. Is there a seating area near the Eastern Arcade? I'm looking for the trade registry, and I've been standing for about 20 minutes, and my knees have made their opinion known." She looked at me for a moment, then she said, in standard, without any particular inflection, "The registry office is closed on mornings when the forum holds formal proceedings. They open at the 3rd hour. How long until the 3rd hour? 40 minutes. Then I have 40 minutes to find somewhere to sit." I glanced at the Eastern Arcade, where I could see, now that the crowd had thinned, a row of low benches along the wall. "Those look functional." "They are the ceremonial observation benches," she said. "They are considered available after proceedings conclude." "Then I'm going to go sit on one. You're welcome to join me if you don't have somewhere you need to be." She looked at me again with the expression of someone evaluating whether an invitation is what it appears to be. I did not elaborate or explain or justify. I had issued the invitation in the only register I knew how to issue invitations, which was the direct one. Take it or leave it. No obligation attached. She considered. Then she said, "I don't have somewhere I need to be until the 3rd hour." We walked across the forum floor to the Eastern Arcade benches. I sat down. After a brief consideration, she sat beside me. Not close. Appropriate distance. The distance that says, I have accepted the company without committing to anything beyond it. We did not speak for a moment. I set the data chip on my knee and looked at the forum, which was clearing steadily now. The ceremonial ring disassembled by station workers who moved through it, with the efficiency of people who had done it many times. She looked at the forum too. I said, "I caught part of what happened up there. I don't know your protocols. Was that something that's going to be all right? Or is it something that isn't?" It was a blunt question. I have been told I ask blunt questions. I have never found a gentler version that gets the same information. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It is something that has been expected for some time. The Keth Solon family made a preliminary expression of interest 14 months ago. They made a formal bonding inquiry 6 months ago. The outcome of the formal evaluation was not in doubt." A pause. It was still. Registering the finality of a thing is different from anticipating it. "Yes," I said, "it is." She glanced at me. "You speak as though you know." "I've had a few things go final on me," I said. "Not the same as yours. But the finality part, yes." She accepted that without pressing it, which I found I appreciated. We sat for a moment longer. "Oral," I said, and held out my hand in the Union greeting gesture. Palm up, Deverell. "Survey Captain, Union Meridian Clause. We're here for resupply." She looked at my hand for a moment. Velshari do not have an equivalent gesture, but they are familiar with the human version from Union documentation. And then she touched the back of her fingers to my palm, briefly, which I would later learn was their closest equivalent. A formal acknowledgement of presence. Yisavel, she said. Keeper Scribe, Kerneth 6 Deep Archive Unit. Keeper Scribe, I said. What does a Keeper Scribe keep? She considered whether this was a genuine question. Apparently it was. The station's long record archive, she said. Ironath 6 has been an active way station for 412 years. The archive contains every transit record, every mapping report, every formal station proceeding, and every dark matter corridor survey filed through this station since its founding. I maintain the integrity of that archive, catalog new entries, and maintain the cross-reference system that allows Union survey vessels and Velshari navigation teams to share data without redundancy. I looked at her. How long have you been doing that? 11 years. 11 years cataloging the corridor data of one of the most active waypoints in the Outer Drift. I turned that over in my mind. Then you know the Iranith corridor better than anyone currently alive. Better than most, she said, with a precision that was not false modesty. She was being technically accurate. Corridor has changed since several of the earlier surveys. My knowledge of the older mapping data is complete. The newer Union survey data adds dimensions the Velshari surveys did not capture. A pause. Including, I believe, data from the Meridian Clause's last 2 runs. I sat back slightly. You've read our reports. I catalog every survey filed through this station, she said. Your methodology in the Corridor 7 sub-branch is different from the previous Union approach. More granular density mapping in the curvature nodes. It produced a more accurate picture of the lane's drift behavior. That was my navigator's innovation, I said. She argued for it for 2 years before I let her run it. I was wrong to wait. Admitting you were wrong takes a certain kind of person, Isabel said. Takes someone who prefers being accurate to being right, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a tone that was almost entirely neutral but not quite. That is not a common preference here. I understood what she meant. I let it sit between us, which was, I think, the right choice. We talked for the full 40 minutes until the registry office opened. It did not feel like 40 minutes. We talked about the corridor, specifically about a discrepancy she had identified between the Velshari's Corridor 9 survey from 80 years ago and the Union's most recent pass, a discrepancy that suggested the lane's outer boundary had drifted approximately 4 degrees in the intervening decades, which had implications for the trade lane calculations that neither party had apparently noticed. She had written a notation about it and filed it with both the station council and the Union survey office. Neither had responded. When did you file it? I asked. 14 months ago. With whom specifically at the Union survey office, she told me. The name was not familiar to me, which suggested a mid-level administrative desk. I said, file it again. This time mark it for the Corridor Survey Division directly. Attention Cartographic Integrity Review. Different department, different priority flag. It'll get to someone who actually uses this data. She looked at me with the expression I was coming to recognize. The brief evaluation, the assessment of whether I was being reliable or performing reliability. Then she said, I will do that. Good. It's a real finding. It should be on record. When the registry office opened at the 3rd hour, I needed to go deal with my manifest, and she needed to return to the archive. We stood at the edge of the Eastern Arcade and I said, I'm here for 2 more days. If you're willing to talk more about the Corridor 9 discrepancy, I'd find that useful. My navigator would find it very useful. I am willing, she said. Do you eat? I mean, I know you eat. I meant, is there somewhere on the station that serves both Velshari and human-compatible food in the same space? Something shifted briefly in her expression. Not a smile, not yet, but the precursor to one. The common commissary on deck 4. 3rd hour to 7th hour daily. The Velshari menu and the Union standard menu run from the same kitchen. I eat there most mornings. Then I'll see you tomorrow morning, I said. She inclined her head and walked away through the arcade, and I watched her go for a moment. Her blue-white luminescence, steady and quiet in the dark mineral corridor. And then I went and dealt with my manifest. I told my navigator, Prika Sen, about the Corridor 9 discrepancy that evening at dinner aboard the Meridian Clause. Prika is 26 years younger than me and approximately 3 times as excited by cartographic data as I am, which is saying something, because I am considerably excited by it. She made me repeat the specifics twice, and then sat back and said, the expression of someone watching a wall fall. A 4-degree drift in 80 years would mean the outer lane margin is 17 kilometers. Wrong in every chart we've filed. That's what she thinks. She meaning the keeper scribe who figured this out 14 months ago. Yes, and no one at the survey office caught it. She filed to the wrong desk. Prika made a sound that contained several things at once. Then she said, I'd like to meet her. Tomorrow morning, I said. Deck 4 commissary, 3rd hour. Prika came to the commissary the next morning, and I watched her spend approximately 12 minutes in conversation with the Savel before she abandoned any pretense of eating and pulled out her own data tablet, and the two of them started comparing figures. I ate my breakfast. I refilled my coffee. I sat across the table and watched two people who cared enormously about the same body of data discover each other, and I felt something that I would describe as the particular satisfaction of Hum, having introduced two things that should have met sooner. Isabel's intelligence was, I want to find the right word for it. It was not showy. She did not deploy it for effect. She used it the way a good engineer uses a tool, precisely in the right direction for the work at hand. When she identified a problem, she identified it completely, without hedging, and when she described a solution, she described it concretely. She did not speculate beyond her data. She did not understate her conclusions out of false modesty. When she was uncertain, she said she was uncertain and specified the nature of the uncertainty. I had spent 19 years working with survey crews in the outer drift, and I had met perhaps a dozen people who thought that way. The number does not change regardless of species. Good analytical minds are not common in any population, and the ones that are also honest about their limits are rarer still. I also watched over the course of that second morning the way she moved through the commissary, the way other Velshari in the space oriented away from her, subtly, without apparent deliberateness, the way a crowd thins around a person without anyone deciding to thin. She did not react to it. She had, clearly, long since stopped expecting anything different. She spoke to Prika and to me with the complete attention of someone for whom the company of people who were actually looking at what horror was not so common that she could afford to give it partial attention. I also noticed something in that morning that I had not noticed on the first. The commissary was busier at this hour, and the other Velshari who came and went from it navigated around our table as though we occupied a slightly larger radius than two people sitting together actually occupied. Not hostility, not even awareness exactly. Just the spatial adjustment of people who had long since incorporated a certain person's location into their movement patterns without having to think about it. Isabel did not comment on it. She had no reason to comment on what was as ordinary to her as gravity. Prika, who notices everything and files it, my eye once across the table. I gave her the look that means later. I also noticed in this second morning how Isabel ate. She ate the way she did everything. Without waste, without self-consciousness, with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned that the space she occupies in a room has a cost she'd rather not make larger than necessary. She kept her cup close. She did not arrange herself for comfort. She was present at the table, the way a guest is present at a table that is not theirs, careful, slightly formal, doing nothing that might be misread as presumption. I had been at enough tables on enough stations to know what that posture cost a person to maintain. I did not remark on it. I ate my own breakfast and asked her more about the archive, and watched her become, degree by degree, less formal, was the only commentary I intended to make. At the end of the morning, when Prika reluctantly left to cross-reference the drift data with our own archive, Isabel and I sat alone for a little while longer over cooling drinks. I said, "How long has the cold light situation affected your work here?" She was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone offended, but the quiet of someone deciding how honest to be. Then she said, "The archive work itself is unaffected. The archive does not care about radiance. It cares about accuracy and continuity, both of which I provide." "And the other parts," I said. The other parts, she said, are not the archive. A pause. I was assigned to the Deep Archive Unit because the Deep Archive Unit is considered low status. The work itself is not low status. 11 years of corridor data is not trivial, but the assignment carries the weight of where the Council believes I belong. She held her cup with both hands, looking at it. Submitted 3 proposals to expand the archive's cross-referencing methodology in ways that would improve both Velshari and Union survey efficiency. 2 were returned without review. 1 was accepted and implemented by a senior archivist who did not credit the original proposal. I sat with that for a moment. The Corridor 9 discrepancy, I said. When you filed it 14 months ago, did the notation carry your name? Carried my designation and my unit. The Deep Archive Unit, yes, I understood. The notation had gone out, stamped, with the address of the place where the Council sent people whose light they did not consider worth watching, and the people who received it had, probably without any specific decision, treated it accordingly. I said, file the Corridor 9 notation through me. Through the Meridian Clause's survey log. It comes out with a Union vessel's credentials, and my captain's stamp. Different weight. She looked up. That is your data to submit under. You found it, I said. It goes out under your name with my endorsement. That's how attribution works when I'm involved. I looked at her steadily. If you're all right with that. The evaluation again, longer this time. Then she said quietly, I am all right with that. Good. I'll have Preeka draft the joint filing today. You review it before we send it. She nodded once. And there was something in that nod, the smallest shift in how she was carrying herself, that I did not press and did not acknowledge, because acknowledging it would have made it smaller somehow. On the morning of the 3rd day, I was not supposed to be in the Central Forum at all. Meridian Clause had cleared its resupply. Preeka had the joint filing drafted and sent, and our departure window opened at the 6th hour. I had 3 hours. I was going to the commissary to have breakfast with the Savell before we left, because it had become, over 3 mornings, a thing I was reluctant to give up. I was crossing the forum floor toward the eastern arcade when the procession came in. I recognized it as a procession because of the formation. The Amber Gold family again, in their dark formal fabric, 4 of them this time, accompanied by the same station official from the previous morning and 2 individuals I had not seen before, who wore the distinctive collar marking. I had come to identify as station council representatives. They were moving with direction and purpose across the forum floor. I looked where they were moving. Isabel was crossing the forum from the north corridor, heading to the commissary. She had not seen them yet. I did not know what the procession meant. I stepped to the side and watched. The official hailed her by her designation. She stopped. She turned. I watched her register the formation, and I watched something in her face change. Not collapse, not flinch, just change. The way a landscape changes when a cloud moves over it, the same terrain in different light. The official spoke. The translation system was not running for this. It was a private proceeding, not a public ceremony, and I did not have my earpiece calibrated for Velshari. I caught nothing of what was said in words, but I understood bodies. I spent a long career reading bodies across a dozen species, because bodies are more honest than words in situations like this one. What I read was, the official was delivering something formal. The Amber Gold family was present as witnesses. The council representatives were present as record keeper. This was not a proceeding that required her consent to proceed. I stood against the wall of the forum, and I thought about it for approximately 30 seconds. What I thought about was this. I was 3 hours from departure. I had a crew and a schedule. This was not my station, not my culture, not my jurisdiction. I had known this woman for 2.5 days. I had no standing in any proceeding she might be involved in. I did not know what the proceeding was. I did not know what outcome it was moving toward. I knew only what I had read in 2.5 days of conversation, and I knew what I had seen in a crowd that thinned around her without deciding to, and I knew what I had seen in the way she had held her hands on the platform 3 mornings ago. I also knew what I thought about that. I walked across the forum floor. There is a moment in any formal Velshari proceeding, I would later read, where the official invites any unregistered party to declare an interest before the record is formally closed. It is considered a procedural formality. It is never used. There is no one, in the normal architecture of a Velshari station proceeding, who would have an interest to declare, and no standing to have declared it earlier. I arrived at the edge of the group as the official was completing the preliminary statements and opening that procedural window. I was standing 3 paces from Isabel. She had seen me. She was looking at me with the expression of someone who is very carefully not showing the thing they are feeling, and the thing they were feeling was, I thought, some quantity of alarm. The official reached the declaration of interests, raised my hand. Everyone looked at me. There is no union equivalent of this procedure. I knew I was not doing it correctly. I did not know the correct words. What I had was the standard phrase that seemed to most closely match what I understood the procedure to require, and 7 years of experience, doing exactly the thing I was about to do on Union vessels. When a proceeding was about to conclude incorrectly, I raised my hand and I spoke clearly. "She's mine now," I said. "I'm claiming the bonding interest." The station official stared at me. The Amber Gold family stared at me. The council representatives stared at me. Isabel stared at me. The forum, which had been partially occupied with morning traffic, had gone, not quiet exactly, arrested. Particular silence of a space in which everyone has simultaneously stopped what they were doing to see what is happening. I stood there and waited. The official found his words first. In standard, carefully, "You are claiming a bonding interest in this individual." "Yes," I said. "Under what standing?" "Personal standing," I said. "I understand that the Velshari bonding system operates differently than Union convention, and I understand that I may not be using the correct procedure. I am not trying to disrupt a lawful proceeding. I am declaring an interest that I should have declared sooner and didn't, because I didn't know this proceeding was happening today." The official looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "A bonding interest declared outside the formal matching process is not automatically actionable. It requires a period of formal consideration and a..." He paused, consulting something I could not see. "The individual in question would need to. The process is not simple." "I understand processes," I said. "I am a Union survey captain. Filed more procedural paperwork than I would like to remember." "Tell me what the process requires," he told me. It took several minutes. The Amber Gold family stood very still throughout. Isabel stood very still throughout. When the official had finished, I said, "What happens to the present proceeding in the meantime?" "It is suspended pending the formal consideration period." "Then suspend it," I said, "and tell me where to file the declaration." There was another silence. The council representatives exchanged a look. The official made a notation. The Amber Gold family, the elder, specifically, said something in Velshari that the official did not translate, and the official responded briefly, and the family withdrew. The official said to me, "The declaration will need to be filed in the station registry within the hour to hold the procedural suspension." "Then I'll be there within the hour," I said. He made another notation and withdrew with the council representatives, speaking in low tones. I was left standing in the forum with Isabel. She was looking at me. The forum around us was still arrested. People had not yet returned to their ordinary activity, and her blue-white luminescence was, I noticed, burning brighter than I had seen it in 2.5 days. Not dramatically, but there was a quality to it that was different from the steady, quiet pulse I had become accustomed to. She said, very quietly, in standard, "You don't know what you just did." "I know what I did," I said. "I may not know all of its implications yet, but I know what I did." "Formal consideration period is 60 days, she said. "You are on a departure window in 3 hours. I know. You have a survey schedule. I know." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Why?" I thought about several ways to answer that and discarded most of them. What I settled on was, "Because you found a 4-degree corridor drift that 14 months of institutional silence should be ashamed of. Because you credit your data accurately and your conclusions honestly, and you don't inflate either. Because you have been doing 11 years of critical work inside an assessment of you that is wrong. And because..." I paused. "Because I have been traveling the outer drift for a long time, and most of what I find out there is empty space. And the things that aren't empty space are worth noting down carefully." She was very still. "I am not offering you a rescue," I said. "I want to be clear about that." I am not declaring an interest and then handing you a list of what it costs. I am telling you that I found the declaration worth making. What happens after the formal consideration period is your choice, not mine. Long silence. My choice, she said. Your choice, I said. I'll file the declaration and then I'll delay my departure window and I'll spend 60 days reading everything in your archive that the Union Survey Office should have been reading for the last decade. And at the end of 60 days, if you decide you want nothing to do with bonding a human survey captain with bad knees and a tendency to be direct, I'll have still read a very good archive and you'll have still refiled the Corridor 9 notation, and we'll both have done something useful. She looked at me for a long time. The blue-white luminescence at her throat was very steady, very even, like a lamp burning in a still room. Then she said, "Your knees are not bad. They're adequate," I said. "They object to standing." "You stood for 20 minutes in the forum gallery, looking for the registry office," she said. "They did not appear to object. They object in private," I said. "They have dignity." Something happened to her face. It was small, a shift at the corners of her eyes, a release in the line of her shoulders, and it was the first unguarded thing I had seen from her since she stepped down from that platform 3 mornings ago. "The station archive," she said, "contains 43 years of Union survey data that has never been cross-referenced against the Shari corridor maps because no one has had the access to do it in both systems simultaneously." "I'm cleared for both systems," I said. "I know," she said. "I read your clearance level in your filing credentials when I cataloged the Meridian Clause's last report." I looked at her. "You knew my clearance level." "I am the keeper of the archive," she said. "I know the clearance levels of everyone whose data I hold, and you didn't mention it. You didn't ask." I thought about that for a moment. Then I thought, 43 years of data, 2 navigation systems, one person who held both, and a 4-degree drift that no one else had noticed for 80 years. I said, "I'm going to go file the declaration and delay the departure window and call my navigator with the news that she has 60 more days to look at corridor data. Then I would like to come back and start with the earliest of those 43 years. If that's all right with you." She regarded me steadily. The blue-white pulse at her throat was consistent, reliable, the signal of a system running without disturbance. "That is all right with me," she said. I went and filed the declaration. The registry official looked at me with an expression I had no language for. He processed the filing without comment. I called Preeka from the registry office. She was quiet for a moment after I told her, and then she said, "Staying 60 days for the archive." And other reasons, another silence. She found the 4-degree drift, among other things. "Captain Oral," Preeka said, with a particular inflection that I had come to recognize as the voice she used when she was deeply amused and choosing. Not to show it fully, "I'm going to need a cabin reassignment chart." "You can have mine," I said. "I'll move to the secondary survey office. I'll be working late most nights." "You will be," she said. "I've seen 43 years of unfiled cross-reference data. Tell the crew we're extended," I said. "I'll make it up to them on the next run. They'll want to know why. Tell them the captain found something worth staying for." Preeka was quiet for a moment. Then she said in a voice stripped of performance, "Good." I went back to the forum. Isabel was still standing near the center of it, and the forum had by now returned to its ordinary activity, but around her a small radius of space remained. The old thinning, the habitual distance. She was watching me cross the floor toward her. Her expression was very still and very attentive, and I thought she looked like someone standing at the edge of a thing they were not certain were allowed to step into. I stopped 2 arm lengths away, the distance that says you choose whether to close it. She closed it, not dramatically, a step and a half, the small distance that puts 2 people in genuine proximity rather than procedural proximity. And she looked up at me with the gray-violet eyes that were lit from somewhere inside her own particular and entirely unmocked light. 60 days, she said. "To start," I said. She considered that. Then she said, "The earliest of the 43 years is archived on Deck 2. The reading terminals there are more comfortable than Deck 4. Lead the way," I said. She turned and walked toward the corridor that led to Deck 2. I fell into step beside her, and her luminescence moved steadily at the edge of my vision, blue-white and consistent, and entirely itself. And I thought, shh, the outer drift is full of things no one has charted yet, and the best ones are never where you expect them. That was the beginning of it. Something I have no tidy category for, even now. The 60 days were not what I had imagined 60 days on a Velshari way station would look like, is to say, I had not particularly imagined them, having assumed until approximately 6 hours prior that I was leaving. We worked. That is the most accurate description. We went to the archive on Deck 2 each morning, and we worked. And in the working we became, incrementally, people who knew each other rather than people who were in the process of discovering whether they could stand each other, which is the ordinary trajectory, and a much slower one. The archive was extraordinary. I say this as someone who has spent 19 years in survey work and has a professional appreciation for well-maintained data. Issavel's archive was the most comprehensively organized body of corridor survey information I had encountered in 2 decades of navigation. Every filing was cross-indexed across 3 classification systems. Every discrepancy was flagged and dated and annotated with her assessment of its probable cause. There were notations going back 8 years in her handwriting, her notation shorthand specifically, which I spent 3 days learning to read, and which turned out to be approximately 30% more efficient than the Union's standard format, a fact I included in a separate filing to the Survey Methodology Office that I did not tell her about until after I had sent it. She found that out on day 21 when an acknowledgement came back with a methodology review request attached. She looked at the filing identifier and then at me. "You filed a methodology proposal," she said. "I endorsed your notation format," I said. "It deserved a formal review. You filed it without telling me. I was reasonably confident you would tell me not to." A pause. "I would have told you it was unnecessary." "Which is different from telling me not to," I said. She looked at me for a moment with the expression that I had come to identify over 3 weeks as the one she wore when she was deciding whether to be annoyed, and concluding that annoyance was not quite the right response. Then she turned back to the archive terminal and said, "The methodology review will take approximately 6 months to process." "Probably," I said. "I will likely need to provide supplementary documentation." "Probably," I said again. She made a notation on her current file. Then, without looking up, she said, "Thank you." I said nothing because nothing needed to be said. Spent the 60 days alternating between the archive and the Meridian Clause, running the Corridor 9 cross-reference work that was already generating a follow-up mapping proposal before the formal consideration period was half the crew. 5 people, all of whom had been with me for at least 3 years, adapted to the extended docking with the pragmatism of people who had learned that survey captains sometimes find things that require more time than scheduled. 2 of them took on short-haul cargo runs from Iranath 6 to keep the vessel accounts healthy. The engineer ran a full systems diagnostic that she had been deferring for months. No one complained in my hearing, which meant either they were not complaining, or they had decided not to do it where I could hear. And either outcome was acceptable. The station itself changed around Issavel in ways that were small, and that I did not call attention to. The radius of untouched space in the commissary narrowed. Not because anyone decided to narrow it. I do not think it was a decision at all, but because a Union survey captain eating breakfast at her table every morning for 60 days is a visible fact, and visible facts accumulate. By the 40th day, one of the junior archivists had started greeting her in the corridor by name. By the 55th day, the station council's data registry had, apparently without formal announcement, begun routing new Union survey filings directly to Issavel's unit, rather than to the general intake. I said nothing about it to her. It was not mine to notice out loud. We spent 60 days in that archive, cross-referenced 43 years of survey data, and filed 7 notations that the Cartographic Review Office sent acknowledgments on, 4 of which Issavel's name led. At the end of 60 days, the formal consideration period closed and the station official asked, in the registry office with 2 witnesses, whether the declaration stood. I said it did. He asked whether the individual in question had a declaration to make in response. Issavel stood beside me and said, in a voice that did not waver and did not perform, that was simply exact, that she did. The official made his notation. On the way out of the registry office, Preeka was waiting in the corridor, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and her data tablet under her arm, and an expression she was only partially suppressing. She looked at Isabel and then at me, and she said, "The Corridor 9 notation got a response from the Cartographic Review Board this morning. They're flagging it as Priority 1 and sending a dedicated mapping pass to the subsector." Isabel looked at the notification Preeka was holding out. She read it. Then she looked at me. And the thing that had happened in small degrees over 60 days, the gradual unbinding of the stillness she had, carried into the forum on the morning I first saw her, the careful folded hands posture that had, piece by piece, come loose in the presence of people who were actually looking at her, completed itself in that moment, not loudly, not dramatically. She did not embrace anyone or make declarations. She simply looked at me, and in her eyes, which were lit from somewhere I could not anatomize, was the expression of someone whose light has been seen, and who is, perhaps for the first time, uncertain whether to believe it and choosing to try. 18 months. "And it only took the right people reading it," she said. "And the right captain endorsing it." "It was your finding," I said. "It was," she agreed, and then quietly, "Thank you for knowing that." We walked out of the registry building and into Iraneth 6's main corridor, where the dark mineral walls absorbed the light, and every Velshari we passed was their own lantern, and Isabel walked beside me with her luminescence, steady and unperformed, exactly as bright as she was, no more and no less, and I found that I had no desire for it to be otherwise. The outer drift is full of empty space. The things that aren't empty space, you note down carefully. That is what survey captains do. You go out into the empty and you find the things that are there, and you mark them down exactly as they are, and you don't let anyone tell you the mark isn't worth making.